Welcome back to NPD Defined. We're diving into number 7 today of talking through the aspect of narcissists don't have empathy and what that actually looks like. If you're new here, my name is Ben Taylor. I'm a self-aware diagnosed narcissist to actually walk you through understanding narcissistic personality disorder, how it's been an impact in my life and how it's destroyed so many lives that have come in contact with mine, and how we help people now to break free mentally and emotionally from the traumatic experience that you're currently in or have just gotten out of, and you're like, how do I rebuild my life after I just got used and abused by a toxic person? So when we step into this, if you want any help with this, please reach out for help. Go to rawmotivations.com. Would love to be able to help you move forward in your healing and your growth. But what we're going to step in today is number 7, and this talking through the aspect of empathy and narcissism, and moving you into a place of like wondering, like, have you ever felt that someone just couldn't grasp or understand or just didn't care about your feelings and needs? Oftentimes, empathy is the biggest piece that is kind of like the hallmark piece of like narcissistic personality disorder. People are like, no empathy, that's a narcissist. So we want to be able to bring it full circle and talk to you about what it actually is. So number 7 from the DSM-5, lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and the needs of others. Now, narcissists are notorious for not caring. Recently, I just talked to a client and she was in the hospital and she was struggling with things that had happened in her life. And when she tried to call the narcissist in her life to be able to take care of the kids at home, she had to end up calling her mom to be able to help her out. Now, the reason why is because he excused it away. He said, it's not that big of a deal. Stop whining. You're not dying and you'll be fine. And made her feel completely devalued for everything that she was going through. But he wasn't willing to help her because didn't have the empathy, didn't really care. I say a lot of times on social media on different aspects of like, hey, narcissists don't care. And the reason why I'm saying that is because this piece of empathy oftentimes is not there to a level or degree that actually shows or comes out in this place of caring for another person. Narcissists like, I don't really care about you. I just care about me. You see, a narcissist is so focused on his wants, his needs, his desires. Everybody else's that comes into play is less than. Doesn't really matter, doesn't really engage with, doesn't really care. You typically see this by what has been demonstrated. And so I typically tell people, like, what has actually been demonstrated? What has actually been shown? You're like, well, I can't tell if he actually cares about me or not. Okay, what has actually been shown? And so you need to look a lot of times at the demonstration, the evidence, so you actually know if this person cares or not. Sidetrack, we're not jumping into that today. We're just talking about DSM-5, lacks empathy. And so lack of empathy, understanding that there's like this emotional void inside a narcissist, this inability or unwillingness to actually recognize your feelings and needs. Like you've been coming up and you've been saying like how you feel about the relationship. Like you're struggling because there's a disconnect. There's a lack of trust. And he brushes it off. He says you're too sensitive. He says you're being over emotional. Like he makes you feel less than because you have feelings. Oftentimes you'll see narcissists, you'll be like they seem very robotic. Like they seem like inhuman in one sense, where they're like walking around and they're not engaging with feelings. They're just doing, well, this is what needs to be done. This is what needs to be done. They're trying to solve your problems. They're trying to fix you, but not really trying to work on themselves. And so you see this with the aspect of lack of empathy. Now, it's important to be able to see, and it's important to be able to acknowledge with this piece of lack of empathy, a story that I want to communicate that oftentimes resonates with people and especially resonate with the narcissist. I had this one time where I'd done something. I don't remember what it is at this point, but I'd done something and my wife was sitting across the room, sitting on the couch, and she was crying. Now, in that moment, there was a moment of understanding and realizing that like what was needed or what she needed in the moment was me to go over and to comfort her, right? To be loving, to be kind, to be nice, to comfort her. But the problem was what she was crying about. You see, what she was crying about, it had to do with something with me. It had to do with something that I did that made her feel bad. It had to do with me hurting her, me lying to her, me cheating on her, something like that. But it was my fault that she was crying. This activates this piece of guilt and shame in my mind that's like, hey, that's death. We're not going to go towards that. That's not what I want to deal with because that's vulnerable, that's honest, that's taking accountability, responsibility, good things, right? But for a narcissist, it's like that is like the epitome of death. I don't want to do that, okay? So as she's sitting on the couch crying, I have an option. I can either go over and comfort her or I cannot. Or I can walk away or I can rage, all these kind of things. But the option to walk over there seems like an impossibility. Because here's what happens. If I walk across the room and I sit down, I give her a hug and I apologize, I say I'm sorry, I try to work through it, it does two things. One, it validates that she's actually having real emotions. I don't want her to feel that she has real emotions because then it makes me feel bad about myself. Two, if she's having real emotions, then it validates the reason why she's having emotions is because of me, because of what I did, because of how I acted, because of how I showed up. Those things right there typically would have me never, ever go over across there to help her because I didn't want to be accountable and I didn't want to have that be vulnerable and that exposure of who I actually am inside. Because then I'd have to come to terms with the reason why she's crying is because of me, because I did something wrong. Narcissist doesn't want to admit that he's wrong at all, ever. Now, there was a couple times where I would go across and I would try to comfort. But here's the different part. The comfort would be, hey, let me comfort you for 30 seconds to a minute. And then if it didn't stop, I would get frustrated because I was wanting it to go away. The whole goal was like, I don't connect with you. I don't want to connect with you. I don't want the feelings that you have because I don't want to deal with my own stuff. The reason why you're crying is because of me. And so let me come over, comfort you, pat you on the back, make you feel better. All right, let's go. And then when she wouldn't go, when she wouldn't be like excited or like back to normal, I would get pissed because I tried, quote unquote, I tried to do something to help support her and love her and she didn't respond. So she didn't love me. She didn't care. Like she didn't see that I was actually trying. Like it all went back to me. And so like, if you relate to this, like, let me know because I need to understand, like, does this connect with you? Maybe as the survivor, or maybe you're watching this today and you're the narcissist. You're like, hey, he just hit the nail on the head of what I struggle with in those moments. I've never put it that way or phrased it that way, but that idea of having to go over and apologize, comfort, or connect oftentimes is this exposing level that I'd rather walk away. Silent treatment, go sit in the other room, play a game, go to work, like rage out so that she feels bad that she's inconveniencing me, all these things. And so sometimes what's happening, and in that situation, it's not that the narcissist has no empathy. This is where a lot of people get confused because they see lacks empathy and they're like, narcissists are devoid of empathy. They have no empathy. There's no empathy that's even capable. And while there's pieces of that that is true to a certain degree, less gray matter because of early childhood development and disconnection with the primary caregiver. There might be less time growing up that they even saw that or interacted with that or understood other people. So there's this piece of like, hey, I get that. Okay. But there's also this awareness of like, hey, I choose not to actually recognize, or how it says, unwilling to recognize or identify with the feeling and needs of others. So for instance, like it was just black and white. My world was black and white. You were this way, you were not this way. Like anxiety and panic attacks, those weren't real. You just didn't trust God enough. You didn't do enough good things. You didn't do this. That aspect, that wasn't true. Like because it was all black and white. Okay. So I wanted to view things in a certain way. So as a result, I wasn't willing to actually recognize that there was other needs. I wasn't willing to see anyone else's perspective. I wasn't willing to put myself in someone else's shoes. And one of the main reasons why that I've been learning recently, like this isn't like, oh, I learned this back then, but learning recently is some of the main reasons why I wasn't willing to do that, because then I'd have to deal with their emotions. We already know that, okay? But because of that, it would have me actually have to deal with my own. And that's the part that I found the most difficult, even today. There might be a moment where my wife is upset about something, and what it does is it activates an emotion inside of me that I don't want to deal with, that I'd rather hide, that I'd rather sedate, that I'd rather run away from. Now, thankfully, I've had some amazing tools with stacking and with working through with honesty of saying, hey, this is what's going on, to be able to flush it out so that I don't actually hold it. But I still recognize that tendency. And she's struggling with something. I don't want to feel that, because then if I have to feel it, I have to deal with my emotions. My emotions are icky. I don't like them. There's something that I try to push away because I don't like feeling those emotions. Typically because I don't know how to process them. Been working on that, been growing in that, but that's one of the aspects. If I actually recognize what's going on, if I actually identify what's going on, then I have to deal with my own shit. I don't like that. Okay? So that's a big part of it. Narcissists, like we mentioned, are notorious for this aspect of not being willing to identify or see the needs in other people. This emotional void piece is like, hey, don't want to do this. Typically what's happening is a narcissist is already compartmentalized, boxed up, or shoved emotions to the side. That way they didn't have to actually deal with it. And this enables them to exploit, to manipulate, and not care about it. Because the caring part, that's in a box back here. That's not something we bring out. We don't deal with that. And so I knew this growing up, and I viewed life as in boxes. And viewed as being like, hey, here's an emotion here. Let me close up sadness. Don't really need to feel sadness. Put it to the side. Then someone dies in the family. I'm like, well, I've already dealt with the sadnesses in that box over there, so I don't have to deal with this issue. So you see this a lot of times where narcissists will compartmentalize stuff to make themselves feel better. Oftentimes they're doing this in the aspect of empathy. You've already seen this. Like, you're in a relationship and you've gone through a really hard time at work. You've been overwhelmed, you've been anxious, like you've been really struggling in the work environment. And when you come home and you're actually seeking comfort and seeking for him to actually understand you, he dismisses you. Doesn't really care about your concerns, makes you feel insignificant, makes your thoughts feel insignificant. It's like, it's not that big of a deal. And he's not actually able to be able to empathize with your stress and offer support, offer encouragement. And what it does is it typically makes you feel stupid, makes you feel isolated, makes you feel alone, because he's got to the place where he's like, hey, your needs don't matter, don't really care, and I'm not going to put myself in your shoes because I don't want to feel that, because I don't want to have to deal with my feelings. Hopefully that helped. Number 7, narcissists lack empathy. Hopefully that gives a little bit more perspective. This is number 7 out of 9. Stay tuned. We have 2 more videos coming out talking about envy and arrogance.